All right. Yeah, so I just mentioned this is about patterning. A couple things I want you all to notice. Hopefully you have this open. If you're able to follow along, great. If you'd rather just listen and do this after, that's okay too. I'll give you all time. A couple things. One, if you want to change the color of your bottle, you'll notice in your tree here, there's a couple folders at the top. One says solid bodies. If you click on this, it will show you the bottle and the cap. And I realize you all haven't built a cap at this point. You only have a bottle. If you right click on either of these bodies and look for this like beach ball with a pencil, and it's kind of convoluted, but if you drop this down, you'll notice there's like this colored ball. In this case with the sriracha, you can see it's red. If you click on this, it will bring up color options. So you can change this. Now, color and rendering is not part of this first project, so please don't worry, but if you want to, if it helps your story, you're welcome to change the color of your bottle. If you are using my template, my default template, the lighting is a little bit better if you're doing screen grabs than the default lighting. So just wanted to show you all how to do color. The other thing I want to show you, I know I did this work for you, but if you look here at the tree, right, we have a couple master sketches. One is for the second demo. The first revolve should look familiar. This is kind of, so you all had something similar to this on Monday. But I want you all to look at the next revolve. So if we right click on this and click on edit feature, which is this like icon up here, it looks like a Tetris block with a pencil. You'll notice it's still the same revolve. There's something different though, because up until this point, we've only really done one feature. So today we're getting into multiple features. Because this is a feature after another one, you'll notice there's a box down here that says merge result. So because this is a cap and it's not attached to the bottle, you want to make sure that's not checked. Obviously, this has already been given to you, so it's not checked. But I just want to, it's not part of the demo. I want to call this out for all of you. When you revolve your caps, make sure to not check this box. Because if you do, it's going to become part of the same body as the bottle. So I just want that to be clear. Now, reminder, I'm sorry, I hope this is not confusing, but the double size of the volume should be based on the bottle only. We are simulating kind of a real design brief where you might be designing a bottle one day in your future. It's the volume of the bottle that matters, not the cap. So if you check the volume of the sriracha bottle, you can do it by hitting Alt plus L, or again, I believe it's under Tools, and then Evaluate, and then Mass Properties. If you click on the bottle, if you don't click on anything, I believe it does, it may not show you anything, but if you click on the bottle, it'll give you the volume of the bottle. So when I'm grading, this is what I'll be looking at. I'll be looking at volume here in cubic inches. I believe that's the default, or whatever you have it. It could be cubic centimeters. That's what I'll be checking your volume against, okay? If for some reason you're unclear on that or you want to agree on the volume, you can always email me and say, hey, this is what my volume's at, or something. We can agree on it if that would help you. But just when I grade, that's what I look at. So it's also worth mentioning, I realize we're on a bit of a tangent here. When you design the double size and the half size, make sure your middle size design is final. Like don't go, if you design the double size and then you go and make a change to your middle size, the volume may no longer align. And that's all I have to go off of. Okay, so that was just a deep dive into saying two separate bodies in one part file. Okay, so now, actually before we move on, are there any questions? So if, let's say you're in here and you forget about the merge result, you'll notice, right, it's all red now. It's as simple as going back to this feature, right click on it, edit feature, and just uncheck merge result. And then it splits it up again. So it's a matter of just a checkbox, removing or adding a check. So yeah, it's not a big deal if you forget that. Are there any other questions? Okay, so this first demo is basically on it'll introduce two new features, extrude, which is kind of like what your toothpaste does out of a toothpaste tube, and pattern, which is how to do something like grip or replicate something radially or linearly, whatever you might want to do. So the first thing we're going to create is an extruded grip for this sriracha cap that has a bit of grip here if you need to unscrew the cap. So it asks you to select this top face and create a sketch on it. So we're using this top face as a piece of paper. It's a flat face, so we can create a sketch on it. You can do that by hitting Alt-S or going to the Sketch tab and simply clicking New Sketch here. And you'll notice we enter Sketch World. A useful hotkey to know is Alt-N. Alt-N makes the view normal to you. So whatever face you have selected, if you hit Alt-N, it will rotate it so you're like looking at the sheet of paper. I believe it's also located here. It's this command. Normal to is what they call it. So it's kind of like a perpendicular view to whatever you're working on. So now we're on this face. It asks you, we're in sketch world, so it asks you to create a sketch on this face. We start by, it's useful whenever possible to connect things to the origin. So we're going to draw a line from the origin in vertical. And you'll notice if I hover vertical, it kind of snaps. It gives us this yellow line that tells us it's vertical. And it asks you to select this edge here. I forget how I phrased it. So the edge of the previously selected face. I mean, another way to phrase this is like the second biggest green circle from your vantage point. And once you have this, you can either hit escape, or I believe if you double click, that gets rid of the tool too. I don't think I've mentioned that before. I tend to hit escape. It's what I'm used to. Now that you've created the line, you want to make it for construction, because this line is just aligning us to the origin. That's all it's doing. So you select the line and just go ahead and click the checkbox for construction. Now it asks you to create a circle, which the hotkey is O, or it's this command here. And wherever you click is the center of the circle, so it asks you to select the endpoint of the line. And here you can just kind of click and drag where you want. Doesn't matter. Again, you can double click to get away, or hit, I believe you can. Nope, that's not working on the circle. I'm going to hit escape to get away. And then you want to select the circle and this widest edge while you hold shift, so you're selecting both. Right? If I kind of rotate my view a little bit, you can see the two things I'm selecting. It's the circle and this. And then relation rules pop up here, and the one we want is tangent. So now we basically have a circle that's going to be, the center is, it's going to be a half circle from this edge, and the edge is not going to go wider than the cap itself. So it's a very simple way to set up a sketch. You could also have done this with a dimension as opposed to setting this tangent. But what we've done is now we've tied the grip to the width of the overall cap. So if you think about your Jenga tower, if this cap changes size, this grip should move with us, ideally. Okay. Are there any questions? So now we're going to introduce a new feature. This is, we've only been using revolves up until this point. This is probably like the most, in some respects, this feature is even more basic than revolve. It's extrude. So if you go to your feature tree, we're still in sketch world. By clicking extrude, it knows, because we're in the sketch, it knows we want to apply the feature to this sketch. So if we click on extrude, you'll notice like a little yellow thing appear, as if, again, it's being pushed out of a toothpaste tube or something. And it's kind of making the circle into a three-dimensional cylinder. Now what the sheet shows you on what I've handed out, there's kind of a bit of a deep dive here in red that just kind of shows you what all of these extrude properties are and what they mean, okay? So there's always a default for all of the properties of the features that tend to load. But just looking at what you see on your SolidWorks screen, the from means where do you want to start the extrusion. So the default is the sketch plane. Wherever the sketch exists, that's where the extrusion starts. Some other options you might want would be surface face plane. So for example, you might put a sketch on the top plane, but you want the extrusion to start elsewhere. So you could select like the bottom of the cap or what have you. If you select vertex, it's kind of like if you want it to start from a point. Offset is like a manual offset. So I can show you some of those things now. So for example, surface face plane, like I could select down here, and now the extrusion starts there. Vertex, it's kind of a point, so I could select a point elsewhere. It's similar to what we just did, selecting a face, but from a point instead. Offset is a manual number. So you'll notice if I click that number up by 0.1 inches, you can see the extrusion jumps and starts 0.1 inches off. So this depends on what your goals are, what you need. In this instance, sketch plane, the default is good enough. The next thing is direction 1. This is how far do you want the extrusion to go. Again, the default is blind. So this is a number you put in, and the cylinder just follows the number that you give it, and that's where it goes. Other options include through all. This is just like an infinitely long cylinder. This is more useful for cuts than positive extrusions. Up to vertex means it will be stopped by a point that you select. Up to a surface is actually what we want to use now. And in this case, you'll notice that this arrow is pointing the direction of the extrusion. But if we go ahead and select this face down here, you'll notice it's smart enough. It realizes that it's behind. It flips the direction and jumps back here. Other options include offset from surface. This is as described. So like if I wanted to stop just short of the surface, if I type in 0.1, the gap between this gray surface and the end of this cylinder is 0.1. So there's a lot. I realize there's like a deep dive. Up to body is like up to the next. So for example, I could select this red body. It'll stop when it hits that body. Midplane means that it starts from the middle and it just gives you a number and it goes, I believe, I forget now off the top of my head, I believe the whole length is 0.7. I don't think it's, let's try this 0.1. If I jump this to blind, yeah. So it starts, the total measurement is the overall length of the cylinder, but it just starts it from the middle. So again, in this instance, we want up to surface and we want it to go up to here. And again, this is kind of like another robust technique. Now, if the height of our cap changes, this grip will always go to this face, to this bottom face. And this height can change and we don't have to edit this feature again, hopefully. Now, here we see the merge results option. In this case, we do want a merge result. We want this grip to be part of the green cap. So we want to leave that checked. Now, we don't want it to join with the red body. So that's what we look at down here under feature scope. It's not clear at all, but what it means by selected bodies is what it merges with. Auto select is kind of like a default smart tool. Honestly, auto select in this case would be good enough. I think it would be smart enough because the cylinder does not touch any part of the red. It would know not to merge that. But it's always better to be safe, in my opinion. So I invite you all to uncheck auto select. And this brings up a box that says, hey, what do you want to merge? I mean, it doesn't actually, it's not clear, but it's asking you what you want the feature to affect. In this case, we want it to only merge with the green cap. So if you click in this box so it's blue, you can go ahead and select the green cap. It makes it gray apparently. And once you have all of that, you can click the checkbox. And you should now have a cylinder that merged with the cap. Okay, now we have one grip, but obviously we would like to have many. So this is the next feature that we're going to learn. It's called a pattern feature. So it's hidden. The only pattern shown is linear pattern, but if you click this little triangle down here, you'll see many more patterns. In this case, and for this project, circular pattern should set you off on the right track. So you could go ahead and select circular pattern. And just like we learned with extrude, it brings up the property dialog. This is kind of like asking you, hey, what do you want to pattern? So for the direction, this is kind of, because it's a circular pattern, it's asking you for the center axis. So here is a situation where you do want to see your sketches. So if your bottle looks like mine, try hitting Alt-V and seeing if you can find this master sketch. If you already see the master sketch, then great, you don't need to press anything. Now, I believe when this loaded, at least for me, the default that it was asking me for was which feature I wanted to pattern. So whenever you click in these boxes, it highlights it blue, and that's kind of what you're selecting. So for me, I'm starting from the top. The direction, again, in this instance, because it's a circle, is the center axis. So if you click in this top box so that it's highlighted blue, you want to go ahead and find this center line in your starting master sketch, or the one that I created, and go ahead and click that. And that's going to pattern around this line. There are some different settings here. You know, for example, do you want the pattern to be a full 360 degrees? Do you only want it to be 180? Do you want it to be equal spacing over this distance, or do you want to manually set the spacing? For the most part, if you're doing a radial pattern, this default of equal spacing and 360 is probably what you want. This number here is the number of patterns and features you want. But this doesn't really mean anything. The reason it was asking us, at least not yet, the reason it was asking us for the feature first is that would be more meaningful because it will actually show you what happens. So now if you notice with SOLIDWORKS, if you hover over things, sometimes this box will appear and it'll tell you. So here it says features to pattern. If I click in here, if you go ahead, I think you can do one of two things. My default, because I think it's more foolproof, is to extend the tree on the right and select the boss extrude that we just did. That's the kind of foolproof way. I believe, let's try it out. I believe if you literally click on the feature you just created, SOLIDWORKS is smart enough to know that it's that extrude. And you can see, again, this is the way SOLIDWORKS works with the features. It kind of shows you in yellow what you're going to get. So in this instance, you can see it loaded boss extrude into here. And now if you start to play with these settings, you can see what happens. So for example, if I take this number, mine says 31, all of your machines may say something different. If you type in 45 and click tab, you'll notice that those grips increase. If you type in 4, you'll notice it'll give you 1 on each corner because it spaces them evenly. So this is a total visual thing. When I'm grading your bottles, I'm not looking for the right number. It's just a visual thing. Was there grip? Did you add grip? That's all that matters in my book for this project. Again, you'll notice here if I change this, I believe if I change this to 180, it squeezes all 45 on half of the side of the object. So that's what these settings do. If you do, let's see, if we do instance spacing, it's the degree at which you want them spaced. So if I want 45 instances spaced at 1 degree apart, you can see it just groups them all right here. Again, for the most part, especially for this project, this is the settings you want. Equal spacing, 360, and just the number. And again, this can be arbitrary till it looks right to you. If you feel that's all good, again, down here, you don't really need to worry about these different options. For what it's worth, sometimes propagate visual properties can get buggy, but meaning to say if you just uncheck it, that's something I tend to do, but honestly, you don't need to worry about it. You can select instances to skip. So if you select this, like I can click on one of these dots and it will just leave it out of the pattern. Again, a little bit more advanced stuff, you probably don't need to worry about it. Once you do that, you can go ahead and click the green checkbox, and that essentially covers demo 1. If I hit Alt-V, it hides the sketch. You can see we now have a cap that has some realistic looking grip. The next demo gets us into fillets, but if you want to just get a preview now, the fillet command here, it looks like this. If you type in a small number, like let's say, let's try 0.05 and try just selecting this face, we can see what happens. It may not do it, 0.01. There you go. Fillets are they can be kind of picky. So 0.01 apparently works if you select this face, and it can give us like kind of a nice clean, soft edge there. Okay, so that does conclude demo 1, but there was a question about grooves on the bottom of a bottle, similar to like a plastic Coca-Cola bottle, and some of your bottles may have that. So while this was kind of like a demo on adding a body here, you can do the exact same thing with a cut. So let me just show you all that briefly. And actually, this will show something that I believe is important that's actually not on here. So briefly, you could, for example, if you want to cut into the bottom of this, we could create a sketch on this bottom face. The thing that's important is sometimes you want to be able to add planes. So these planes here, front, top, right, these are the default, but sometimes you want to add another plane. So for example, in this instance, it may be useful to have a plane on the ground. Again, we put the origin here just below the cap so that the cap doesn't break on us when we change the bottle size. So actually, this is important. I do want you all to know how to do this. If you need to add a plane to create a new sketch, the way you do that is you go to Insert, Reference Geometry, and Plane. I'll say that again in case anyone wasn't paying attention. So if you need to add a plane to draw something off of, you go to Insert, Reference Geometry, and Plane. And this will bring up, again, another property dialog asking you where you want the plane to be. My number one suggestion, I think the best way to create planes is with lines, is by making a plane perpendicular to a line. So for example, in this instance, my first reference might be this center line, and my second reference might be where the line ends. And you'll notice that it kind of makes suggestions. So it's perpendicular to the line, and it's coincident to where the line ends, and that's all you need. Where the yellow is, we'll create a new plane. That will always be my suggestion. This will be more important for project 2 when we learn sweeps. For what it's worth, that's my advice. Now, that said, there's other ways to create planes. If that's confusing to you, I think some students like it to just simply select a plane that they want it to be parallel to. So for example, the top plane, and you can just simply type in a number here and slide this plane wherever you want. I think sometimes this is a little bit more friendly for students to understand. So for example, if I type in 5 inches, you can see the plane has jumped up. If I check the box flip offset, it'll move the plane down. For me, I think tying it to the master sketch, again, the master sketch is kind of the shelf that all of your features should be built on. That's my advice. So in this instance, I'm going to select this center line, this bottom point, and now we have a plane perpendicular here. And I'm going to click check. So now we have a ground plane for which to build off of. I'll try and keep this quick. So if I create a sketch on here, same thing, I would tie it to the origin. Now again, if your feature, again, if it's cut into the bottle, I don't have a bottle with me that has this, but I'm just kind of going to mimic what it might look like. What you want to do is create basically a triangle to cut up and into your bottle. So this feature is shown in the second demo, but there is a way to mirror entities. So here again, I've created a vertical line to the origin. This line off to the side is somewhat arbitrary. It's representing it's going to be part of our cut. What we're going to do is we're going to mirror this line so that it's symmetric about this line that we set for construction. If this seems confusing, don't worry. I show it step by step in the second demo. But if we select both of these lines and click on mirror entities up here, you'll notice it flips this over to create a V. And now these are tied symmetrically. If I move these, the other one will move with it. The mirror entities, because one of these lines was for construction, it automatically knew to mirror it over the construction line. That's how it works. I can now complete this triangle by just simply creating a line from here to here. We now have a bit of a triangle. So this is where we can now start to create our bottom features similar to the way we created the grooves on the top here. I can go to extrude cut. The settings here are very similar to the positive extrude as you saw on the sheet. So this is where it starts, this is where it stops. You'll notice it's having the cut go away from us. You can simply, there's a couple ways to reverse it. You can simply take the arrow and drag it the other way. You can also toggle this icon here. And this is something where if you wanted to be accurate, you could measure how far that cut up goes into your bottle. But I'm going to guess that it's, let's maybe say about a ½ inch, maybe a little bit more, 0.6. Go ahead and click check. This is where fillets become handy because I know that it's not on your bottle, it's not this rough. So you could maybe like make this fillet bigger. Eventually fillets fail in terms of like not working anymore. So the way fillets work is if it's tangent, it will follow. It does this automatically by itself. Because this is a tangent line, it will apply the fillet all the way around to it. And there's a chance, I need to think about this more carefully, like we did the cut going up. Now that I think about it, it may make more sense to have the cut coming at us. So maybe I'll look at this and then I'll give you a conclusion later. But for now, sticking with it, this fillet, again, if I select one of these edges, it just follows it. It knows to do that. And now it's a matter of simply going back to our circular pattern in the direction here, again, selecting the center. For the features, I believe you can select multiple features. It doesn't always work as well if you select multiple features, but something like this, it's relatively simple. It should work. So I selected these 3 features. I want it 5 times. I click the checkbox. Yeah, based on what I'm seeing now, I think it's better that the cut happen on a horizontal face, or sorry, like on the front plane as opposed to this bottom plane. Right, so I've now made this triangle sketch on this front face. I think this is going to give us a better looking feature. So here's an instance where I would want to use offset because I don't want it to start in the middle. So I'm going to go ahead and say start the sketch or start the feature offset. Same thing, this toggles which way the offset goes. So we want this towards the outside. And this might give us a better looking feature, I think, more similar to what the actual bottle does. The order in which you apply fillets is important. So you'll notice I put the top one in first, and then this bottom one, as Bryce asked before, it will chain and go around that edge. And then put this one in last. So I forget who asked this question. I think it was Daisy, how to do the bottom. That's a good question, because I'm realizing now it is a little bit more nuanced than what I showed at the top. But that is my advice on how to do these, is have a triangle cut coming out at you. Reminder, if I just show these settings again real quick, to make it offset. So it starts in the middle and it's offset. Here's an instance where through all makes sense. You just want to make sure that this cuts through everything. Because if you don't do through all, if you make it blind and then suddenly you make your bottle bigger, you may end up with a cut that doesn't go through it. Again, now that you've applied these, once again, you can go here, circular pattern. You want the direction to be about the center of the bottle. You want to make sure that the features are the cut followed by the fillets 5 times or however many times it goes around your bottle. Click check. And now you should have something that's close to accurate. The nice thing with this too, though, is like you can always go back here, edit this sketch. And let's say, once it's patterned, it looks like it should be wider. You can simply drag this wider and it should rebuild and make it wider. It looks like a fillet might have failed, unfortunately. Or something caused it to change. Okay, are there any questions on any of this? Yes. Okay, so the question is, what happens if instead of it's going in, it's going out? Well, okay, actually, most simply, this is what I would change. Some of these fillets might fail, but if I draw a new line in here and hit trim and delete these out. So technically, I know you have like little bumps going out, but you can think of it as the other wider bumps going in is one way to think about it. I don't know if that makes sense. We have some errors now. Let me change the sketch to be a bit more narrow. We change this. So whenever you get these red X's, it means a feature failed. So if you go ahead and just delete what's failing in here, this one should work. And this is a very simple way to say, like, now it looks like these are bumping out. Does that make sense? So to think of it a little bit differently. So that's one way to think about it. That's the quickest way that I can answer based on what I've already showed. But I'm happy to show you a little bit more nuanced way. This is new for all of you. There's something in SOLIDWORKS called suppressions. It's a way to turn a feature off without actually deleting it. So if you select features and right click on them, there's this icon called suppress. And basically it's like a light switch. It just turns the feature off. If that's confusing, you don't need to worry about it. So I'm just going to quickly mimic what's on Jocelyn's bottle. I'm creating a sketch down here. It looks like there's like a little foot that comes down. And now it has like little bumps on it. So again, I'm going to take a sketch from the front view here. I'm just going to create a little bump that looks similar to what is on her bottle. If I'm doing this properly, I'm aligning this centered with the, well, I guess I can do it with the origin. I bring this line down. I click in the center here. I click on this line. I tell it to be vertical and for construction. And now I have my bump centered on this. So here again, we can look, because it's a positive, we now want a positive extrude. So I select the extrusion command. Here is an instance where we want to use offset from surface, because we want it to be bumping off this surface a little bit. I don't know if I measured your bottle based on my eye, maybe it's like 0.1. Obviously, you can see it's stopping short. If you check the box reverse offset, now the bump comes out in front of this face. And you'll notice it's hard to see because it's like a simplified curve. But this curve here will match this curve here. You can go ahead and click check. And now it's the exact same thing. We go ahead to our pattern command. We select our center of rotation. For our features, it's smart enough to know it was just the boss extrude we did, so that's good. But if it's not in there, once again, you can simply go and just click on it. And now I don't know how many bumps the bottle had, but you can put in the number you have like that. Does that make sense? Good question. Great question. Yeah, so the question is, when you add these new features, are you editing the master sketch or are you making new sketches? I would say little details like this to make a new sketch. Because if it is a bit of a gray area, and I always hate giving this answer, but sometimes it just depends on experience and knowing what you need to change down the road. The most direct answer for this project is any details in grips or cuts into your bottle are best out of the master sketch as a brand new sketch, as needed. The master sketch, again, it kind of serves as like a grounding for your model. So for example, this is why suppressions are handy. If I get rid of these, I can go back and have this unsuppressed here. If we go back and look at this sketch, I know I modified this to make a point before. You know what, I don't even need this line, because what I can do, actually, no, sorry, I did need that line for this symmetry. But you can tie your new sketch to your master sketch. For example, if I take this point and I drag it to where my push-up is, this point, you see how it turned black? It's now tied to my master sketch. So if this moves up, this will move up as well. So there are ways to make new sketches attached to the master without editing the master. Does that make sense? I did that simply by, my master sketch is visible. It's this gray sketch we can see back here. If I take this point and I drag it onto a point in the master and let go, it has now attached it to that point. And that's why it turned black. So like, for example, I can take a line here. If I draw a line like this, it's blue. It's not attached to anything. If I take a line and we see my master sketch, you can see it's highlighting the master sketch as orange. It's kind of hard to see because of the bottle. Let me hide it really quickly. Nope, I hit the wrong thing. Apologies. So here, this is gray. We can see our master sketch. This is a blue line. It's not attached to anything. If I make a new line and hover over the master, you can see it's turning the master orange. That means it's referencing it. So I create this new line here. This point is black. It's now attached to the master. So it's confused because we have lines for our cut. Now to just make a point here. So like we see where this is. If I go ahead and if I edit my master sketch now and make this 0.5 because it needs to be higher up. And now this broke, so I'm going to just change this to be 75 to bring it back. Do you see that? How the triangle grew to that height and this moved up too? So because this moved up and these were attached to it, this was the new sketch we created. It is now tied to the master. It moves with the master. And that is good enough. Again, the master is designed as such. The intent is that if your boss comes back and says, hey, make this wider, make this taller, anything that is affected by the width and the height should be attached to that master so it moves with it. It doesn't have to be updated in the master itself. Because we have tied this triangle shape, because we tied it to the master, if this portion of the master moves up, the triangle will also move up. And because this cut extrude is based on this triangle, yes, the cut extrude will move. So let me be nuanced about your question. Your question was, if you update the master, will like the cut extrudes and the extrudes update as well? The answer is they will update if the sketch they're based on is tied to the master. Does that make sense? Okay. Those are good questions to ask. I realize it can be a bit heady or convoluted to answer. Yeah, so maybe, here, let me undo some of these things now. I'm going to break this coincident by deleting those rules and just moving this. And we'll show this again. So let's say your cut, okay, the short answer is if you have something nuanced on your bottle that's like a slight offset or different than what I showed, as long as you hint at it, if you, for example, with your bottle, if you just wanted to treat it the same way I showed here, you won't lose points. So this is for everybody. As long as you just kind of hint at what's going on, if you get it close, I'm not going to be, on these like little pattern details, I'm not going to be harsh when I grade. As long as you at least attempt it in some way, shape, or form. That said, though, I do want to answer your question. So let me take this triangle sketch again. I realize yours is maybe a bit different. So here's another instance where I'm going to tie this sketch to the master. Whoops, let me Control Z here. If we look at the master, I can make the triangle be a center point on here. I can say midpoint, simply by selecting both of those things. So I'm going to make this just a little bit smaller to make this points. That was asking if it wanted to attach it to something else. Okay, so making this a little bit smaller. So the first question is, how do we determine how far we want this cut to be? So the first way I did this was with an extrude cut. And again, remember, I suggested making this through all. And here again, it defaults to start from the sketch plane. So this is a little bit backwards to think about it this way, but if you set this offset to like maybe an inch here, this is how you set how deep you want it, is by setting how far this offset is. So that's one way to do it. And this is the first way I showed you all. So that's how you can set the depth, is by changing this offset. Now here's another way. I'm going to set this to blind. I'm going to set this offset to be really far, so it's actually, in fact, away from the bottle. And this is somewhat arbitrary. I could make it anything, 2 inches. So now the cut starts away from the bottle. Now another way to do this is to actually flip the cut, so now it's going towards the bottle. I'll make this shorter so we can see. So as I extend this, it cuts further into the bottle. But if I just glancing at Mireya's bottle, it's just like a slight push in on that face. This is another good instance to use offset from surface. So now I can select this surface here. I can set the offset to be something small like 0.1. Now you'll notice, okay, so now we have a bit of a problem. Because the sketch goes to the tangent point down here, it doesn't fully stop it. And I'll be honest, this is also why I made sure that it was inside this fillet. So that's why this funny thing is happening. It's happening because the sketch is so low that this pink face can't stop the bottom. So I'm going to take this triangle, I'm going to move it up, and we'll look at that setting again. So I'm simply going to go here, break this relation, and drag this up. And now again, I'm going to go to extruded cut. Same thing, I'm going to set the offset to be something massive, like 2 inches. And then I'm going to say offset from surface on this face. Are we not working? Okay, hopefully this worked. So this one is 0.05 away from it. If I reverse the offset, you can see that it sets the distance at 0.05 from here. And that's similar to what you have, I think, Maria. But again, that's a little bit more advanced and a little bit more convoluted. I'm fine with you just doing a simple flat cut, even though it's not identical to what your bottle is. So again, this is for everybody. Just if there is a pattern at this stage, we're still all early in SolidWorks, get it close to mimicking it. I'm not going to grade your patterns harshly. Yeah. So okay, so for your bottle, Sammy, the second demo is going to be more helpful. I think at this stage, if you all have individual questions, I'd rather address it individually. I think we captured most of the major stuff, but I can help individually on things. Are there any more questions on patterns, extrusions, or extrude cuts? Yeah. Extruding text, that's one that I'm happy to answer for everyone because that may be true for more than one person. Okay, again, for this first project, the main thing I'm looking for is just the general correctness of the bottle. So for text, you don't need to have it. I won't mark you off if there's text in your bottle and you don't have it. But it's a nice to have if it's something you want, okay? So I'm just going to quickly hack the top of this bottle off. These are great questions, everybody. And Sammy, I'm happy to answer your question either individually or with the second project, if that helps. or with the second demo, because the second demo will cover cuts like the one your model has. So let's say you want text on this top face. I can simply create a sketch on this. There is a sketch text tool in SolidWorks right here. I believe the way it works is you need a line, because that's where it's going to write the text. So I have this line here. You want to set it to be for construction, because you don't want it to be part of your extrusion. And with the line selected, you want to go ahead and click this text tool, and you can type in whatever you want. If you uncheck this, you can actually like pick the font, pick the size. You can either do it based on points or based on heights. Some text will work better than others. Let's see what that does. And then simply, once you have that text, you should be able to go to features. You're still in Sketch World, hit extrude, and get a positive text. So the text is actually not that hard. You can try and download fonts to match the true Lego font if you can find it. But again, I'm not worried. Whatever you can make it Comic Sans for all I care. And yeah, the more real you can get it, the better. But you will not lose points if your model has text and you don't have text on it. Any other questions?